Cthulhu Reborn presents.
Alright, this is Thunder God's Curse, a Jazz Age scenario for Cthulhu Eternal. I'm your game master, William Adcock. Joining me today are Dean Englehart and Chad Bowser.
Hello.
Hello.
It is May 11th, 1936, and our protagonists have just arrived by train in Phoenix, Arizona. Protagonists, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm Jason Moretti, a private eye from San Francisco, California, but I think I'm going to have him pronounce his name Jason just because he thinks it's more refined.
Fair enough.
I am Jason's associate, Paul Reynolds. I have a certain fondness, shall we say, for both bowling and pulp magazines. I do like myself some detective fiction.
We sound very much like cosplay detectives.
You are arriving in Phoenix, Arizona at the invitation of Dr. Edward Rousseau, a local physician. If either of you would like to look up Dr. Rousseau prior to arriving, you can give me a intelligence roll.
I did not make it, unfortunately.
But you got a spectacular fumble, a 0-0, but I did succeed.
All right. Jason, you remember that Dr. Rousseau and his father Henry made national news last year, and with a quick bit of looking, you actually do pull up a newspaper clipping, which I am dropping into Roll20 right now. If either of you would like to read that.
I can't because I have no idea that it exists.
Oh.
Missing orthodontist declared dead. Desert man hunt fails to locate Dutchman hunter. The search for Dr. Henry Rousseau, a New York orthodontist who went missing last month in the Superstition Mountains, has been called off, having failed to locate any evidence of the missing man. Rousseau, an amateur treasure hunter who had previously taken part in hunts for California's lost Pegleg mine, the city of Atlantis, and the Little People of Wyoming's San Pedro Mountains, had traveled to the Superstition Mountains in search of the fabled lost Dutchman's mine. Rousseau's disappearance marks the third treasure hunter to go missing since 1930 while hunting for the Dutchman's hidden source of gold. Previous disappearances include electrician Tex Barkley in January 1933 and independent news service field reporter Lyndon Weber in October that same year. Locals in the Superstition Mountain region variously ascribed these disappearances to the Dutchman's curse, allegedly laid over the mine by the old Dutchman as he lay dying, and to the wrath of Cthulhu, a supposed thunder god of the Apaches, said to inhabit the superstitions during the summer months and laying claim to all gold in that range. The clipping is dated July 1935, last year.
And what is the name of the doctor we're meeting?
Edward.
So his son.
Okay.
So he has summoned us to Phoenix?
Yes. Your first impression of Phoenix is one of blinding sun and absolutely breathtaking heat. Your train pulls into Union Station at 10 a.m., and contrary to what you might have expected of the Arizona desert, you find Phoenix to be a modern, bustling metropolis. And as soon as you exit onto the platform, you quickly spot a thin, stoop-shouldered man with a bristling walrus mustache holding a piece of cardboard with your name on it, Jason.
Well, I'll go over to him and say, Dr. Rousseau, I assume.
Oh, no. My name is Walter Davenport, Dr. Rousseau's assistant and chauffeur. He explains that Dr. Rousseau could not be present to meet you himself, as he's broken his foot while dismounting a horse.
A common problem these days.
Yes.
Well, Walter, if you pick up our cases from the train, we're happy to go with you to see Dr. Rousseau at his house.
So, loading your bags into the Cadillac 16 sedan, it is a short drive, only 10 minutes or so. to the Hotel San Carlos, where Dr. Rousseau is maintaining a suite. The 7-story Hotel San Carlos is an attractive building in downtown Phoenix, and as you enter the lobby, you find yourself suddenly blasted with chill air. The Hotel San Carlos is the first building in Phoenix to offer air conditioning.
Wow, in 1936.
Yes.
Impressive. I'll say, Paul, don't get too used to this. We're not going to get it for the officers.
Do we really need it in San Francisco, Jason?
Well, I don't, but it might catch on. Who knows?
Maybe.
Can get pretty warm in San Francisco. It's sort of muggy, really.
Yeah, I guess in June and July. It gets kind of like it.
Yeah, that's right.
You are shown up to Dr. Rousseau's suite. After announcing you, Walter withdraws. Dr. Rousseau is a lean, wiry man in his mid-40s, tanned by the desert sun. You find him propped up in an armchair, his plaster-wrapped left foot elevated and resting on a stool. He is surrounded by atlases and geological survey maps of the region, and your entrance brings him out of a deep contemplation of a bleached human skull on a table opposite him.
I see you have a conversation partner already, Dr. Rousseau.
He nods and says, "Allow me to explain. I'm sure you're aware of my family's tragedy, which made national news last year. My father, Henry, spent many years as an amateur treasure seeker and adventurer. And with the state of things in Europe currently, I'd asked him to spend another year or two in the United States before trying again to locate Atlantis. I didn't think he would get into too much trouble searching for the lost Dutchman's gold mine, but instead he went missing. I came immediately to assist in the manhunt, but nothing was found, and eventually we had no choice but to have my father declared dead in absentia. A month ago, this skull was discovered outside Tortilla Flat, a small community on the Apache Trail through the Superstition Mountains. The town's been a stopover for gold prospectors for at least 70 years. The skull was identified by dental records as belonging to my father. Strangely, it was found in an area that had been checked and rechecked following my father's disappearance. Stranger still, last week I received his checkbook in the mail, which had been with him when he disappeared. Charlie O'Reilly, a half Apache who works as a guide for prospectors in the Superstitions, mailed it to me, claiming in a letter that he'd found it on his porch after driving away a prowler who'd shot at one of his dogs.
So can I ask, Dr. Rousseau, you're not from Phoenix. Where do you normally reside?
New York State.
Okay.
He gently picks up the skull and shows you a pair of holes, one on either side, and says, officially, these 2 holes are believed to have been made by the upper and lower canines of a mountain lion. However, I'm absolutely certain that these holes represent the entry and exit wounds of a bullet through my father's head. The Maricopa County Police have declined to reopen my father's case as a murder investigation, sticking to the official stance that my father died of thirst or misadventure. I believe my father was murdered, and the official response is not acceptable to me. I am prepared to offer you a $100 retainer to go to Tortilla Flat and investigate my father's death as a murder. I am prepared to cover your expenses for the duration of your investigation, and I'm willing to pay you $500 if you can identify the killer or retrieve the rest of my father's remains.
So where did your father stay while he was in Phoenix?
Well, he was last seen in the town of Tortilla Flat.
But did he have a base of operations in a city like Phoenix?
No. Tortilla Flat is 55 miles east of Phoenix, and he was anticipating spending potentially 2 or 3 weeks out in the mountains.
Can I just ask, Dr. Rousseau, one thing that I always found curious when I was reading news reporting of your father's disappearance was, as an orthodontist, how did he find so much spare time to go mystery hunting?
He was actually retired.
Ah, yes. Well, everyone's got to have a hobby.
Yes. He presents you with a few pieces of paper and a photograph to assist you. The photo, taken in 1934, shows a vigorous, shirtless Henry Rousseau standing proudly on the deck of a tramp steamer, showing off a newly received tattoo of an anchor on his chest. A note penciled on the back of the photograph states that he had gotten the tattoo for his 70th birthday. Henry Rousseau was bald as an egg, with thick glasses and a bristling white mustache that sticks out several inches on either side of his upper lip.
That probably won't be helpful in identifying him, though, because I'm going to guess down in Prospectory, Arizona, everyone looks like that.
Could very well be. He did have steel pins in his left hip, repairing a fracture obtained while exploring Kentucky's Mammoth Cave.
What are the other papers, Bill?
Well, he unfolds a letter and passes it to you, which I have made available in Roll 20. It was a letter addressed to Edward Rousseau that had been in the checkbook but had not been mailed prior to Henry's death.
Well, I'll pass it to Paul.
Yes, I found it, Edward. The Lost Dutchman's Mine. The name is misleading. Walt stumbled across a buried cache of Indian gold, and there is still a fabulous amount left. Enough to set a man for a dozen lifetimes. I am mailing this from Tortilla Flat, a tiny town, barely worth the name, on the Apache Trail. Hope you'll join me. I could use someone I can trust here. I'm sending directions just in case. Begin 5 miles from the peak they call Weaver's Needle. 2,500 feet tall among a cluster of lesser peaks and basalt masses. The first gorge on the south side from the west end of the range contains a marked trail leading northward over a high promontory ridge, then down past Sombrero Butte into a long canyon running north and finally into a tributary canyon. Very deep and rocky and densely forested with a continuous thicket of oak scrub. I have succeeded where so many have failed. And it's not signed?
It's not signed, but it is in Henry Rousseau's handwriting. And then the last piece is a creased map, which Edward Rousseau has a story about. He had actually been the one to give this map to his father. 10 years earlier, Edward Rousseau had treated an elderly Mexican man, one Pedro Peralta, for malaria. In gratitude, the old man gave him the map, claiming it had been drawn for him 60 years earlier by his father, Manuel Peralta. Edward Rousseau explains, before the 1840s, all of this area was owned by the Peraltas, an aristocratic Mexican family who allegedly pulled fantastic amounts of gold out of the Superstition Mountains. Fleeing south in 1848, they loaded a wagon train with gold to carry with them. An Apache war party set upon the wagons, burning them all and killing everyone they could find before carrying the gold back into the mountains to rebury. From what I've gathered, the Apache believed some sort of demon or thunder god lived in the Superstition Mountains, and that the gold was rightfully his. Manuel Peralta was the sole survivor of this massacre. Decades later, in the 1870s, Manuel drew a map for his 3 sons, Hector, Gomez, and Pedro, the youngest. The 3 men entered the mountains looking for gold, but as they neared the site of the mine, they were attacked, I believe, by Jacob Waltz, the famed Dutchman. Pedro never returned, but held onto the map until 1926, when he passed it to me.
Sounds like quite the industry in searching for this mine.
Well, Waltz passed away in 1892, and I think the treasure hunter started looking for his secret source of gold before he was cold.
Oh, in Arizona, that would take a long time.
Indeed.
So, I'm sure that my associate Paul and myself would be happy to take this case, and the remuneration that you described seems fair. I mean, it's not exorbitant, but considering that you're in such extravagant accommodation, perhaps it's a trifle on the stingy side, but we'll do it nonetheless.
You're also in the middle of the Great Depression.
Well, there is that, but that's why you have to negotiate.
Right.
Paul, is there anything that you would like to ask before we head out, I guess, to check out this remote and doubtless hot and unpleasant part of Arizona?
Well, Mr. Rousseau, may I see your father's skull real quick?
Certainly.
Looking at it, I'm not going to say this to Mr. Russo, but looking at it, does it look like a bullet wound? I think I have enough experience in that area to know that one hole is going to be small, the other hole larger, and there's going to be directionality to the skull fragments.
Yes, this absolutely looks like a bullet wound to you.
Okay, I thank him for that, and I pass it back to him.
45 caliber, if you had to guess.
So not a lot left of one side of the skull.
No.
Do you have recommendations for where Mr. Moretti might seek accommodations in Phoenix before we get on the road?
He's willing to have you put up at the Hotel San Carlos for a night or two if you
Okay.
need to spend some time doing research or making preparations in Phoenix prior to setting out.
I'll stand under one of these air conditioning vents and say, I think that's definitely something we'll need to do. Maybe more than a couple of days.
Happy to make that arrangement for you.
Fantastic. All right. I think the game's afoot, or whatever they say in the detective things. You'd know, Paul.
Yeah.
Say something impressive.
Say something impressive? Let's do this.
Okay, now we can leave. You can't leave the meeting with the client without actually having something very profound to say just before we walk
And
out.
you did get the retainer, right, Jason?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Important. I'll stash that away. Right. To the bar.
So, Jason, you think we should head to Tortilla Flats in the morning?
Think so. It sounds like there's every indication that that's where any clues might be found, unless you have other ideas.
No, I think that's where we need to start. Do we need to acquire some horses?
Well, is Tortilla Flat on the railroad?
No, you would need to either rent horses or a car.
Well, the horses around here do seem dangerous because this poor fellow has actually got a broken leg from one.
Broken foot, but yeah.
If there's that kind of peril involved in it, I'm not sure that I'm interested in Arizona and horseback. But on the other hand, if we're heading out into the wilds, I suppose we might have to rough it a little bit. So 55 miles on horseback does sound a long way to go, though.
The interesting thing I think about that letter that was unmailed, we're not looking for a mine per se. It was just a cache of gold.
Yes.
We might want to be careful in how we phrase things when we're looking.
Yeah.
For the wrong turn of phrase would incite a riot.
Heaven forbid that we do that. Sounds like all the other jobs we've not finished.
Yeah.
All right. Do you want to head off to the horse procurer place, whatever that is?
Well, we can rent you an automobile if you're more comfortable driving.
Well, we'll need a horse eventually, but maybe we can pick one up in Tortilla Flats. Go in style at least that far. We have this generous $100 retainer. Surely we can rent a car for a few days.
Yeah, and hope we can get gas up there.
They'll have a Bowser, surely.
I'm sorry, what?
So, Paul, maybe you can make all that happen.
Okay.
I think I need to enjoy some of this cool air.
I'm going to go secure an automobile for the best possible price.
I think given Paul's background, the best possible price might be free. It just might be somebody else's car.
Back when they used to prank and glow plugs and all that, you got to wonder how common car theft was, given how long it took to start it.
So you are able to easily obtain a Ford pickup truck, and it'll take you about 2 hours to get to Tortilla Flat.
I assume there's a road all the way there, right? Maybe not much of one, but are you ready, Jason?
I guess so, although he is paying for us to stay in this luxury hotel for a couple of days, so are we in that much of a hurry? There's a pool. Have a look at the pool. All right.
I think the sooner we finish, the sooner you get your money.
Okay, that is fair. Maybe we can on-sell the room reservation as well.
Right.
So what time of day is it, Bill?
By this point, it's probably about noon.
Well, we can go this afternoon, I guess.
Yeah, we'll let you stay in the air conditioning until, what do you think, about like 3 o'clock? And then we'll get the tortilla flat about 5 when it's starting to cool off.
Well, that sounds fair. Sounds like you've thought of everything, Paul, as usual. What would I do without you?
You'd probably be dead, Mr. Moretti.
I think you're probably right. Like the rest of the agency.
Yeah, that wasn't a good turn of events in Eugene, was it?
Yeah, it's the stuff down in Mexico City that worries me. Let's not speak of that again.
Right you are, Mr. Moretti.
All right, we'll follow Paul's plan.
The drive to Tortilla Flat is uneventful and boring. Tortilla Flat itself consists of a main street of packed earth, flanked by shops and businesses. A general store doubles as a post office, a doctor's office advertises haircuts, and a saloon called the Thirsty Dutchman stands complete with batwing doors looking like a film stage. The town does not appear to have changed much in the past 60 years. Every building you see is weather-beaten, nearly stripped of paint, and aged by sun and sand. The only visible concession to the 20th century is a Sinclair Oil Company gas station at the far end of the main street, a garishly green-painted statue of a brontosaurus on the roof, being the brightest splash of color to be seen anywhere in town, the prehistoric behemoth's coloration not yet dulled by the sun.
How about that, Mr. Moretti? A dinosaur.
Yeah, amazing. How has Hollywood not found this town?
Think how much
No.
time and effort they would have in not having to build all those crazy backlot sets if they had this town.
So is there a telegraph here? Telegraph station at maybe at the general store, post office?
Yeah, there'd be one at the general store.
I'm just making plans for when we have to telegraph in for a doctor for Mr. Moretti.
Great forethought.
So shall we go to the saloon?
I guess that's the place where all the news is going to be found.
And is this like a saloon / hotel maybe, or just a straight up bar?
It is just a saloon, but there is a small motel next door.
This motoring craze has got out even as far as Tortilla Flats.
Apparently so. And there's a gas station and a motel.
Now I think it's really going to catch on.
Well, Mr. Moretti, we'll let you do your work at the bar.
I think I might sit at the back and observe. Why don't you go up and see what you can find out?
Okay. So how crowded is the bar right now?
It is probably a half dozen people kind of drinking around the room. It looks like every saloon you've ever seen in any Western, right down to the mirror behind the bar and the rough-hewn battered tables scattered around. The only evidence you can see that it's 1936 is a battery-powered farm radio sat atop the covered piano, popular music rattling from its tinny speakers. The bartender himself also would not look out of place in a Western movie, probably in his mid-40s, thinning hair brushed across his forehead, with a 5 o'clock shadow and a paunch. He nods at you as you enter and says, "What can I get for you?"
I'll have a whiskey.
He nods and goes to pour, moving slowly. Go ahead and give me an alertness roll, please.
So I'm sort of lurking in the background, just watching the room.
I got it, yep.
Yeah, Yason, you're not close enough to notice this, but Paul, you do notice framed on the wall behind the bar next to the mirror is a victory medal from the Great War, suggesting that the bartender here might be a veteran.
Interesting. I have no military training, so I guess I'm not a veteran. When he hands me the whiskey, I just kind of nod to the medal and ask him, "Did you serve?"
He nods and says, "Yeah, I took my trip to France."
1936, right?
Yes.
I would have been old enough. I guess I didn't go. Glad to see you made it back. A lot of people didn't.
He nods and says, "Ain't seen you before. Dutchman hunters?"
In a manner of speaking, yeah. To be honest with you, we're less looking for the Dutchman and more for one of the guys that was looking for the Dutchman. There's that guy, Henry Rousseau.
Oh, yeah. I remember him.
Was he trouble?
He seemed old for a treasure hunter, and remember him because he's the first person to ever come in and try and order a glass of wine here.
He didn't bring any back from France?
He chuckles and says, "Drank that a long time ago."
And, well, you should. But you were saying, I'm sorry?
It's a tragedy that the old man met his fate out here. The mountains are a desolate and lonely kind of place.
Yeah. His son just wants to see what other, maybe if any more of his belongings, of his father's belongings, can be scoured up or anything like that from the mountainside. You know, right now he doesn't have a lot to go on. So he's just looking for memories of his father. He's paying us, a little bit to come out and take a look.
He nods and says, "Yeah, I did hear something about a skull being found, but I'll tell you, these mountains are the kind of place where reality and legend blur. Everything surrounding the Lost Dutchman's mind seems to hover on the line between real and rumor."
Yeah, I imagine these mountains are just full of skulls to be started. And each one has a story. So with this line between reality and legend, which side do you fall on?
He wraps his knuckles on the bar and says, last I checked, I was still real.
Indeed. So do you have any, kind of embarrasses me to even ask this, but do you have anything that's maybe not quite as strong as water for my traveling companion back there?
He chuckles and pours out another whiskey and pushes it across the bar to you to take to him.
And one last question. If we wanted to head out toward Weaver's Needle, what would be the way to go?
He tells you to go out past the edge of town, past the Sinclair station, and you head straight out, and you can't miss it. It's the tallest peak around.
Now, right now, we happen to have an automobile, but horses might make the journey easier. Are there any that we can hire?
Oh, yeah. Old Gus at the general store has a couple horses to rent.
So, Bill, while they're talking, I'll cast my eyes around the room and see if there's anything else happening around the bar or the saloon that is worthy of note, or if anybody's taking a special interest in Paul and the bartender talking about this stuff.
Not particularly. The handful of people who are drinking, who are all middle-aged, weather-beaten men, throw the occasional glance at you and Paul, but it doesn't seem like there's any maliciousness to it. There's just, oh, here's someone who's not caked in dust.
Yeah.
So I'm going to extend my hand across the bar to the bartender and motion for myself, Paul Reynolds. I didn't catch your name, sir.
Ed.
Ed? Well, pleasure
Yes,
meeting you,
sir.
Ed. Any good places for food around here?
Fortunately, you're stuck cooking your own. Again, old Gus will set you right in terms of food that'll keep you running. Might not be anything fancy.
Well, thank you for that, Ed. Head back
Sure
to
thing.
Mr. Moretti. Bring him his whiskey.
You've got me a ginger pop.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll throw it back like a ginger. Why didn't you say anything, Paul?
I've been talking to him. To Ed, the bartender.
What did you learn?
Well, you know that, yes, indeed, Mr. Rousseau was out here. This town is, from what I can gather, there's probably a pretty brisk trade in the Dutchman mysteries. I think that's their claim to fame, and they're going to milk it. Mr. Rousseau was out here last year. They are very sad for his demise, but they consider it just par for the course if you're going to leave an adventuresome lifestyle when you're that advanced in age. And they apparently say that everything around here, when the Dutchman mine is mentioned, it's pretty much a blending of reality and legend.
Well, what
So
does that mean?
You might want to have your salt ready.
Saying it's all bull dust.
Quite possibly. But thinking about the directions that we got from Edward, I've noticed a gap thinking about him. Right?
Oh, yeah?
Because he says you begin 5 miles from the peak they call Weaver's Needle, right?
Mm-hmm.
In what direction?
Right. But looking at that map, most of those directions you're going to be running into something.
It's like what the first gorge on the south side from the west edge of the range contains a marked trail. So I guess 5 miles south, maybe?
Trust your judgment on that.
Mr. Moretti, you're the brains of the outfit here.
That's what it says on the door. But I'm happy to have other people help out when there's need to maybe think a bit more about. Where do you think we should go?
We should probably head to Weaver's Needle. And looking at this map here, Bill, north is to the right, right?
I think that's right.
Yeah, north is to the right.
Because there's a place not far from that arrow called Peralta's Camp, and also one called Dutchman's Camp. But if Henry Rousseau's letter is to be believed, then they're at the wrong end of that gorge. Would you agree, Mr. Moretti?
Which way up is this map?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. Whatever you said, it sounds right.
Go ahead and give me an appraise roll while looking at that map.
Mr. Moretti's the money man.
Not enough. Oh, there you go. What do you mean? You've got a higher appraise than me.
I had not looked at my character sheet.
It's more like stake out expensive items, I think, in your case.
You're pretty sure this map is a forgery. Looks like it was artificially aged with tea and likely nowhere near as old as Edward Rousseau was told that it was.
Well, Mr. Moretti, that's a damn shame.
Not a surprise, though. This whole thing is just some sort of weird tourist industry for this town. Even this bar, the Thirsty Dutchman, your mate, the bartender's cashing in just as much as anybody else. But still, there's a murderer out there somewhere, I'm sure, because unless we find something that points that way, then we're not going to get our payday.
No, we aren't. You could twist an ankle out here.
So getting off a horse.
So do we
Okay.
want to visit Gus's general store or reconnoiter the peak first?
Don't we need to go to Gus's to get horses to go to the
We could
Weaver's
drive to the
Wheel?
peak climb. But let's go to Gus's because I'm sure Gus is, based on his name, going to be a wealth of information.
The general store guy always knows what's what, right?
That's right.
To Gus's!
Yes, let's go to the general store. Perhaps I'll have a lolly for you.
That would be sweet.
The general store is a simple single-story building with a mailbox in front and a barrel on which a checkerboard has been set up, flanked by 2 unpainted wooden chairs. Inside, shelves are neatly stocked with dry goods and canned food, tools, shirts and pants, and a very limited supply of firearms. A stable out back contains a few horses. You're greeted by Gus himself, a tall, rail-thin man with a short, square white beard, who looks the two of you over and says, "Well, what kind of supplies are you short on, fellas?"
Probably that most important one, information.
I was going to go a clue, but yeah.
So I take it you're old Gus.
Sure am.
Pleasure to meet you, old Gus. I am Paul Reynolds. This is my employer, Mr. Moretti.
Pleasure to meet you, gentlemen.
Enchanté.
Mr. Moretti here has been retained by a certain Rousseau to find any mementos of his late father, Henry Rousseau.
Gus recognizes the name and shakes his head sadly. Fact is, a man his age should never have been out here in the first place. Why his family let him go is beyond me, I suppose, although he did seem a strong sort.
Was he a frequent visitor here in Tortilla Flats during his time?
He stayed at the Sunset Mesa motel over there, and as far as I know, all of his belongings were returned to the family.
Well, they're interested more in maybe what he took into the field with him. If we can find the place where he passed.
Well, Mr. Reynolds, I reckon that piece of information is one you'd have to ask the good Lord for.
I didn't know if you had heard about the recent expedition that had located a skull.
I did hear something about that, but weren't it found in a spot that had been checked over and over again?
That's what we were told. So that's kind of intriguing in and of itself, I would say.
They call them the Superstitions for a reason. There's no shortage of strange things going on out there.
What's the strangest you've heard?
He tells you about a haunted canyon leading into the Superstition Mountains. Anyone trying to ride a horse or drive a car through the canyon sees a pair of large, hairy-knuckled hands manifest, sees the steering wheel or the reins, and try to steer the unfortunate victim into a canyon wall.
How far from here is that? Or does it depend on who's telling the story?
He couldn't tell you what canyon it is. The Superstitions are a little bit of a maze. But that's what he's heard people say they saw.
The skull was found in a place that was searched over and over a few times. Do you happen to know where that is, or have you just heard that it was researched repeatedly?
I think you'd have to check with Charlie O'Reilly for that. Heard he was the one who found the skull.
Oh, really? And Mr. O'Reilly is...
He was the half Apache guy, right?
Yes.
And also, say the place has been searched over and over. Who's been doing the searching? Who's been looking for Henry? Have been other teams out looking for him before, or just local townsfolk?
After the manhunt was called off, no one looked too closely anymore after that. But as I understand it, Charlie found the skull in his wanderings.
Maybe we could talk to him.
Now, does Charlie frequent Tortilla Flats, or is he more of a outside the limits of town kind of guy?
He lives outside the edge of town. Folks hire him as a guide into the mountains. I reckon he's the only person who's been in Tortilla Flat longer than I have.
That's a claim to fame, if ever there was one.
He leans in close and kind of lowers his voice and says, "If you ask me, I think that Charlie knows exactly where the Dutchman's mine is, but when city folks hire him as a guide, he leads them in circles through the mountains, keeping them well away from where old Jacob Waltz's claim was. Reckon O'Reilly's probably old enough to have known Waltz personally, and maybe was sworn to secrecy by the old Dutchman.
Do you think he's protecting the location, or maybe siphoning a little bit off here and there? Not
Yeah.
asking to pass judgment on your friend, but if you were to meet the good Lord and he were to say, "So, Gus,"
Well, I would say if it's true, he's just protecting it, because once you take a look at his cabin, you'll reckon that he's not siphoning off any gold himself.
as long as we're chatting here, Gus, what is your take on the Dutchman's mine? Real? Not?
I'll tell you what I think.
Thank you, Gus.
I heard that before he came to the Superstitions, Waltz was working out in a town called Wickenburg at the mines there. I reckon he was just carrying around some gold he stole from the mine out that way and telling everybody he had a secret mine.
Interesting. So now Wickenburg, how far from Tortilla Flats is Wickenburg?
Paul, I'm not going into that haunted canyon. No, siree. Get me on the horse, maybe, but if it's going to be hands grabbing the reins, not going anywhere near it.
I mean, when they mentioned Big Hairy Knuckles, I thought it was just you,
That's just a nickname.
because you shave regularly.
Wickenburg is almost 120 miles from Tortilla Flat.
So you could say he relocated.
Yes.
So I guess we're going to probably tomorrow head out after we talk to Mr. O'Reilly. So if you could be so kind as to maybe put together a couple of expedition packets, we would gratefully pay you for your time and trouble.
Certainly.
Include some appetizers as well.
I think the appetizers are the sand and tumbleweeds.
Well, sometimes you just got to rough it.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of which, is there somewhere we can stay for the night? Maybe that
Motel?
Sunset Mesa?
Who runs
Yep.
the Sunset Mesa, Gus?
Young feller just got hired on as manager, Patrick Dolan. Good kid.
I will take our leave of you.
Oh, and old Gus, we'll also need some horses. Hosses, I suppose, is the way it's pronounced around here, for the trip tomorrow as well, because I guess we can't take the car out to Weaver's Needle.
Sure thing. Horses are $5 per day, plus feed costs and a deposit down in the event a horse is injured in the mountains.
Does that happen often? Or is it more likely the horse injures the rider?
A lot of loose rocks out in the Superstitions. Easy for a horse to slip.
Did old Rousseau hire horses from you, or did he bring his own?
He did hire a horse for me, and I never got it back.
No, we'll keep an eye out.
Might be another reward in it for us. Paul, this is going to be quite the payday when we find this murderer and this horse. All right. Must be time for finding somewhere to bed down.
And also, I forgot to tell you, there's no restaurant here.
So we're going to get some grub then, some appetizers.
You have to cook your own.
Cook your own? It's like you can do that now?
Yeah. If you're lucky, maybe you can hunt your own.
Yeah, that sounds messy. No wonder the horses never come back. We get eaten. Well, let's just pick up some supplies from old Gus. Paul, you can put together some sort of dinner for us, I guess, back in the motel.
Make you a ham sandwich.
Toasted, I'm sure.
And with beans.
Got to be on horseback tomorrow. We're going to at least play the part.
That's right, Mr. Moretti. Or should I say, Cookie.
Just go get ourselves a room or a couple of rooms.
From one end to the other of Tortilla Flats, how many buildings roughly are we looking for side of street? Is this just that classic little, like, half dozen or something?
Yeah, it's probably a dozen or so buildings on either side of the main street, and then there's a couple little side streets branching off of it, lined with older residential buildings that some of them actually look abandoned. If you ask anybody, the current population of Tortilla Flat is 34.
Maybe, Mr. Moretti, you can get a building down here and open up a branch office.
Well, I'll tell you what, we could probably make a small fortune from people going missing searching for that mine. It seems like this is the main industry in town.
The mine or finding the lost people?
That's right. Exactly so. Maybe it's a brilliant business plan you've just come up with there, Paul. Quite happy to steal it. So, shall we retire for our exotic dinner?
We shall.
It's easy enough to check in at the Sunset Mesa. The desk clerk is actually the manager, Patrick Dolan. Kind of excitable young man. He had his feet up reading Western pulp as you entered and quickly jumped up and asked if you were Dutchman hunters.
Not exactly. We're hunting after a Dutchman hunter, in fact. You ever heard of old fella Rousseau that came through last year?
I read about it in the papers, but I only got to Tortilla Flat about 6 months ago.
What do you reckon happened to him then, from what you hear around town?
Old man out in the hot desert. Reckon the heat got to him, or worse, a mountain lion.
Yeah, that's what they say. I reckon we get 2 of your best rooms, thanks.
I think they're the same.
All right.
So what you're reading there, Mr. Dolan?
He holds it up. It's the latest issue of Western Stories.
Any good ones in that?
Yeah, he's enjoying it.
Here I even have the latest Black Mask if you want to read that.
Sure thing, mister.
There you go.
Sounds like one of them criminal journals to me.
He is happy to trade you.
There's a lot to learn from these stories, Mr. Moretti.
Like how to whip up a ham sandwich.
So just out of curiosity, Bill, does Mr. Moretti know what I did before I came to work for Mr. Moretti?
Yes, he would know that you are a former career criminal, which gave you the skills that make you so invaluable to the Moretti Detection Agency.
Yeah,
Like cooking.
like cooking and a certain lack of moral fiber.
Well, we don't want any of that in our dinner, that's for sure. No moral fiber, please.
So we will prepare toast and beans for Mr. Moretti.
Seems like a Western thing. Maybe we could sit around a campfire in the yard of the motel as well.
I'll have my ham, bacon, and cheese sandwich with some apple.
Ah-dee-da.
You have your meal and the night passes uneventfully.
Thank goodness.
So yeah, I guess we head back to Gus, pick up our gear and our horses and head to Mr. O'Reilly's.
Charlie's?
And then when we get back to Gus real quick, gonna find out from Gus if there was anyone else in town that Mr. Rousseau was a frequent visitor of.
No, Gus can't recall anyone that Rousseau would have spent too much time around.
So, and I understand that there were manhunts for Mr. Rousseau when he went missing, right?
Yes.
Who called for those?
They're like law in town, like a sheriff or something?
Like who said we need to be looking for Mr. Rousseau? We haven't seen him in a while.
It would have been like he was expected to check in after a certain amount of time and never showed up.
So he would have checked in with the motel or...
Probably the motel, yes.
So you're saying there's no police in town?
There's probably like state police that check in periodically,
Right.
but there's no one really assigned to Tortilla Flat.
You're safe, Paul.
You're not, mister. You're not.
I'm sure I'm not out here. All right.
Shall we mount up, Mr. Moretti?
Let's go find old Charlie.
Yeah, what's the best way to Charlie's, Gus?
You're given directions. That's an easy enough find. About 500 yards past what would ordinarily be considered the edge of Tortilla Flat is a small ramshackle cabin with a wide covered front porch, surrounded by a rickety, unpainted wooden fence. Chickens roam the yard freely, and in the shade of the porch drowses a mangy-looking dog and a man sitting in a rocking chair, a rifle resting across his lap. He calls for you to stop and identify yourselves before he's willing to give you the okay to come through the fence gate.
Yes, we're friends. We're friends. My name is Jason Moretti, and this is my associate, Paul, and we're just here to ask you some questions about that skull that you found.
All right, come on in.
Phew, it's close. Very nervous
Around old people?
around people in rocking chairs.
Does he have a weapon visible?
He had a gun.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, he's got a rifle resting across his lap. As you approach, you get a better look at him. Deeply seamed, weather-beaten face with high cheekbones and dark, deep-set eyes peers out from beneath a battered hat. Silver hair is drawn back in a braid, and despite the heat, he's wearing a faded and patched flannel shirt and denim jacket. As you approach, he says, "What can I do for you?" But tell you, I'm not heading back into the Superstition Mountains again.
Oh, we're looking mainly for information, Mr. O'Reilly.
You remember
Point-
that old Rousseau guy that came through last year? Do you have anything to do with him?
Well, he initially contracted me to guide him into the mountains, but canceled the day we were supposed to leave,
Was
the day before.
that the case?
Said he wanted to trust his own instincts.
And how'd that work out for him?
I think we've all seen how that worked out for him.
About this skull that you found, how did that come to your possession?
Well, tell you, it's a damnable thing. I was doing a little bit of prospecting myself. Nothing too intense. Walking a regular trail into the mountains. It was sitting right there, plain as day on the edge of the trail.
You sound like someone wanted you to find it?
Seems like it. I've walked that trail probably 100 times in the past 6 months and never saw it till that day.
Can I throw an insight roll just to see whether I think he's telling the truth?
Sure, go right ahead.
I succeeded.
He is telling the truth.
That's annoying.
So I understand you do not want to go back into the mountains right now, Mr. O'Reilly, but could you point us in the direction of that trail and maybe a rough distance on where you found that skull?
Sure, but I'll be honest, I don't recommend you going into the mountains either.
Why is that?
Do you tell him that Edward Rousseau contracted you?
We've not yet.
So he explains that about a week ago, or probably closer to 2 weeks, he'd been awoken in the night by the manic barking of his dog Mutt. Mutt had been tethered in the yard on the far side of the house from the chicken coop. Laying awake in bed, O'Reilly heard the porch steps creak under a heavy tread and the jangle of spurs. There was a heavy pounding on the door, and a thick, gravelly voice yelled out, "O'Reilly, y'all better take this warning. Stay the hell out of the mountains if you want to keep your skin." At that point, Mutt broke his tether and charged the stranger, who apparently fired a shot at the dog and missed before fleeing over the fence. O'Reilly heard the shot, but Mutt was uninjured, and he dug a .45 caliber slug out of a fence post the next morning. He also found the checkbook on the porch, where the stranger had apparently dropped it in his haste to leave, as well as finding some unusual tracks beyond his fence.
Unusual?
You maybe point them out where they were?
I can do better than that. I made plaster casts of the tracks.
You're a man on a mission.
Thinking that when we open our agency branch here, I know who's going to be on the payroll.
He disappears into his cabin for a moment and pulls out a number of plaster casts. Some of these resemble human hands with broad palms and 5 short, thick fingers, but about twice the size of your hands, Paul. Other tracks have 5 thick toes arranged in a half moon and vaguely resemble the tracks of an enormous dog or similar animal.
So like with like a dew claw and everything?
Yeah,
Center pad.
exactly.
The fingers you said were short, right?
Yeah, they're short, stubby fingers compared to the dimensions of the palm.
Okay. And so, Mr. O'Reilly, you found these outside your fence here, right?
Yes,
But you also heard the jangle of spurs
right.
and something fired a gun?
And there was that threatening kind of speech and stuff. So, I mean, I figure you'd know everyone in Tortilla Flat. Recognize any of the voice?
No, didn't recognize the voice at all.
Had you been warned off like this before?
No, this was the first time it's ever happened.
And how long ago was this? 2 weeks?
Yeah, a week and a half or 2 weeks.
Anything happen prior to that you can think of that would maybe have earned you the ire of somebody?
No, I've been leading prospectors into the mountains for 30 years, and I've never had anything happen like this before.
Damn thing.
You're on good terms, I'm sure, with all the local tribes too, right?
Sure, I don't pick fights with nobody.
Just out of curiosity, when you got them trails of tracks outside your fence, which direction were they headed?
Well, looked like whatever it was had come up from the mountains, were coming down from the mountains and paced back and forth at the fence line and then turned around and headed into town.
Not like an animal or nothing.
Now, something about
Did
these
it-
tracks.
No,
Ain't
yeah,
right.
There's nothing right about these tracks, Mr. O'Reilly. But now, at some point, did it seem as though the tracks stopped using like the hands and the feet and became just the feet, or was it always the feet? I guess another way to look at it, does it seem to you like it always walked like a dog, or did it ever stand up onto its back legs?
Looked like it had always walked like a bear.
Okay. Well, this is definitely interesting, Mr. Moretti.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
does your years of detectiving experience lead you to believe?
Well, it's a damn thing, isn't it? Something strange going on here, and somebody really doesn't want us to go up in the mountains and have a poke around. I think they're trying to make it so as we can't hire Charlie and I guess to scare off anybody else. But we're just far too brave to be scared by such threats, right?
That's right, Mr. Moretti. Now, why would they have tried to scare us off a week and a half, 2 weeks before we got here, before we even knew we were coming?
Well, they're scaring off Charlie because they know that we were probably most likely to try and hire him on. How long ago was the skull discovered?
About 3 weeks ago.
Right.
Oh, so that's more
So
recent than I
that's
thought.
there you go.
So, yeah, this was not long after you found that skull. So you're in touch with the area, Mr. O'Reilly. Are there any people who live in the area who maybe do not want to be disturbed? I'm sure you've heard about back east where they've got like the moonshine runners and all that who just do not like anybody poking around in their business. Are there
He lights
similar?
a cigarette, puffs at it thoughtfully, and says, "Yeah, I
How much
reckon
time
if
do you
there
got?
was anybody like that in the mountains, they'd have to come into town for supplies." And
Mr. Moretti and I are from San Francisco. Without the benefit of like Gus's store and tortilla flats, there's no way to maintain like self-sufficiency.
not while sitting in one place. This was all Yavatai land way back, and folks traveled around. They followed the buffalo, or they were nomads.
I guess one thing that anybody, if they were living out here and was hoping to make a go of it, they need water. How much water is there out here, really?
Not a whole lot. You'll want to bring a supply with you if you're going into the mountains.
No waterfalls or anything like that?
Brings.
You
As
might
an
find a
aside,
few springs around, but
as an aside, Mr. Moretti, there's a waterfall on the map.
Oh, right. Gotcha. Huh.
So I think that's further proof that our map is hokum.
Well, we didn't pay for it.
No.
So, Charlie, just before
Yeah.
we let you go for the day, one of the things I guess we've been hearing a bit about is crazy stories of superstitious mumbo jumbo things going on in the mountains. Is this the story that you've got of strange beasts and tracks and things like that? Does that align or afford with any of them tales that people talk about things in the mountains?
he leans back in his rocking chair and says, "Nothing I can link directly to the mountains. Heard plenty of stories as a kid about man-eating giants. The native tribes from all over have those stories. First thing I thought of when I saw those tracks.
Are those Yavatai stories or?
My mother was Apache. I heard it from her mother. And don't know as much as I would like.
Ever been any other people in tortilla flats seeing things like that before, or is this just something that you've only just seen, never been seen before in town?
I don't reckon it's ever been seen before.
Now, are there any others in town who, like you, are maybe keepers of the lore? You know, they got the old stories that they like to bandy about when there's tourists to spook. Like Gus told us a story about the giant hairy knuckled hands that will steer a horse into the walls of a gorge.
Charlie shakes his head and says, "Well, I couldn't tell you about that. I think that might be something old Gus made up himself. I don't reckon there's anybody who's been in tortilla flats longer than I have."
That's what Gus said. He said he was second to you.
I understand why you wouldn't want to take us in the mountains if you've been threatened in this way, but maybe you can give us some directions for where you found the skull, and maybe if you've got any thoughts on where else we could scout around to see whether there's any signs of ne'er-do-wells lurking up in them mountains.
And also, Charlie, while you're doing that, real quick, I'll call him a knucklehead, right? Some knucklehead gave us this obviously faked map of the area. Is there any validity to anything on here?
He looks at it and just kind of chuckles and, confirms that this is a copy of bogus maps that have been sold since the 1890s.
But at least like the major rocks like the Bluff or Weaver's Needle and all that fairly accurate.
He looks over it and says, if you're dead set on heading into the mountains, let me at least draw you a better map.
That would be very much appreciated.
If you show him the letter, he can map out the directions that Henry Rousseau wrote down.
Does he seem at all interested in those directions? Maybe an insight check?
Yeah, go ahead and give me an insight roll.
We both failed.
Yeah, we both failed.
He seems like he's pretty poker face about it.
While he's drawing the map, I'm going to ask him some of this stuff that was in the newspapers about the superstition of the Apaches and the thunder god Cthulhu. Is that just like newspaper hokum, or is there actually a real thing?
He kind of chuckles and says, everyone I've ever heard talk about an Apache thunder god was a white man. The Superstition Mountains are prone to terrible thunderstorms. Especially in the summer, they can be pretty intense with a lot of lightning strikes. My guess is that prospectors facing these storms created stories about what they thought the natives must believe the storms to be. But that's just my guess.
Yep, that sounds like the kind of thing they would do. Sounds a bit crazy.
Well, my grandmother never said a word about Tulu or anything like that, so...
Well, that's good to know.
So, historically speaking, the gold rush and everything, was the Superstition range a rich range, or did most things wash out?
It's never been flush with gold. There's some placer mining where it's more panning for gold that's washed out of deposits than actually mining.
So there's very few actual mines dug out into the mountains.
Yeah, O'Reilly says that the Lost Dutchman's mine is actually the only gold mine he's ever heard of in the Superstitions.
The other thing I found kind of interesting about this letter that Rousseau never sent is he talks about having found this thing that wasn't even a mine, but like a cache of Indian gold. Is that even a thing? Like, do indigenous people even collect the gold or mine gold or value gold? Or is it just a white person thing?
He says that those people would use gold sparingly as decoration, but they didn't necessarily pursue it the way white people do.
Quite ring true.
So with the map that O'Reilly has drawn out, how does it compare to the one that Edward provided? I'm pretty sure Edward didn't think it was a fake.
Right. It's a much less complicated map. And it does align with the written descriptions that Henry Rousseau gave.
So is there another drawn map, or is it just using the descriptions in the other letter?
Just using the descriptions in the other.
All right. So is there anything else we want to ask Charlie before we head out, Paul?
I think we've pretty much plumbed a lot of information from him. Although I guess, Did you know Mr. Rousseau while he was alive?
I met him once or twice, but I didn't know him particularly well.
So did you get any impression that there was anybody in town that really didn't like him? Maybe might have wanted to do him in up in the mountains and just make it look like a disappearance?
No. Anything like that wouldn't be good for business.
Yeah.
The town lives and dies on the legend of the Dutchman's mine.
Yeah, which makes me wonder why someone would try to scare you off, because you're an important part of that as well, that whole industry. You're the guy that everyone hires to take them into the mountains, and you're too frightened off from doing it by threats from someone, then how's that going to help the town?
Makes you think it's somebody not from town.
That's right. It does make me think that. My expert powers of deduction lead me to that conclusion. Is that right, Paul?
Yes, very much so. You are the expert at deducing, Mr. Moretti.
Yep. Well, I think we can take our leave of you. Thank you. You've been very, very helpful. And your map is probably going to save our lives.
Of course, and stay safe out there.
We'll try.
So Since we already have the supplies from Gus, are you ready to head out there?
I guess so. But the one thing I did want to talk to you about before we head out, after we've left Charlie, is that did you notice that one of the interesting things that he mentioned is that whoever it was that came around and threatened him off and shot at his dog, he reckons it was a 45 caliber shot. That's the same as what seemed to have caused that bullet wound in the skull that you inspected before. So I'm wondering, maybe there's a connection there as well.
Maybe there is, but I imagine also 45s are pretty popular out here because of the stopping power.
Yeah, well, there is that.
You got a bear or something, you might be able to scare it off with it.
So I guess we'll head up into their mountains.
Mm-hmm.
Lead on, Paul.
Before we go too far, I mean, I know it's been a week and a half, but how often are rainstorms and stuff around here? Not very?
Not very.
I wonder if there's a chance we could pick up any sign of those tracks.
Give me a search roll.
70% on search. I succeeded. Both succeeded.
All right. Yes, you can easily find the tracks, and they do match up with the plaster cast that you were shown.
And with Charlie's description that they basically went back toward town?
Go ahead and give me a track roll.
Track.
Yeah, that's not good.
Fancy.
Nope. Neither of us can do that.
But we both came close.
Yeah, that's true. We can spend some willpower if you want. Actually, I can spend 1 willpower and make it a success. I will do that.
So yeah, you are able to trace the tracks. They do seem to come from the mountains.
I'm more interested in where they're going to.
The tracks do lead to the edge of town, like right at the end of the main street.
They had walked into the street?
Yeah, looks like there was a spot where it paced a bit. One of you go ahead and give me a luck roll.
I succeeded.
I did not.
So, Jason, you notice before you step in it a rather substantial pile of dung that does not appear to be from a horse, right by where the tracks stop.
Well, look at this. It looks
how substantial is substantial?
Probably about a pound of dung. It's dried out, but clearly something was here long enough to relieve itself.
Well, there's your strange animal. So, have we actually heard any suggestion that there's been any other strangers in town recently, the last couple of weeks?
No, but
you haven't asked.
We can go talk with Ed.
Ed or Gus should probably know.
Gus would know. Ed would know, I'm sure. Also, Dolan would know.
You want to go and ask one of them, and maybe we'll split up. I'll go talk to Dolan, and you can check out those other guys.
Okay. And you should probably take some of that dung with you to see if they recognize it.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I don't think we need to be dragging dung into people's motels.
Both of you go ahead and give me a sanity roll, please.
For the dung?
I failed, even though I've got 70. What am I taking?
1 point.
Now, I made it.
Paul is not bothered by the prospect of meeting something with giant human hands that craps in the street.
He probably spent most of his life associated with them.
Probably, yeah. I mean, probably on both sides.
All right. So if we're going in real quick and actually just ask around about other strangers that have been lurking around town in the last couple of weeks, do we find anything?
Newcomers, you know.
Yeah.
So asking around about newcomers, Ed actually tells you that a real odd fella has begun to come in regularly over the past few weeks, right before closing, dressed like a cowboy and looking badly sunburned. He pays in gold flakes and drinks in silence. Always the same order, 3 shots of whiskey, before heading back out into the night. Ed's best guess is that he's a prospector, but he's at a loss for why the man's in costume.
So when you say dressed like a cowboy, you mean like hat, spurs, the whole...
Hat, spurs, duster,
chaps,
gun belt.
Gun?
Ed couldn't tell you. Like, he's just seen, like, the belt itself. The duster obscures whether or not there's a gun in the holster.
But he's sunburned, so...
And always right before closing. Any problems from him?
No. Like I said, he takes his 3 shots, drinks in silence, and then leaves.
I'm guessing that the motel owner guy hasn't heard of anything like that? The guy that wouldn't be staying in the motel. I come back empty-handed.
I will tell Mr. Moretti about what I found.
It sounds like someone playing at cowboys. Like some city folk that's trying to pretend that he's a cowboy.
Could be, or could it be the man who shot up O'Reilly's? I mean, if he's got a belt gun, spurs.
Anybody see him crapping in the street?
I
No, there
chose
have
not to
been.
go in that direction.
Well, that is interesting. Where'd you get the gold flakes? He's just panning,
Yeah,
maybe.
I was going to ask Ed real quick before that was over. Gold flakes, does it look like they were shaved or like natural? Like he was clipping
He
coins?
actually pulls some out, and yeah, they look like shavings,
Like he was clipping coins or something?
something like that, or it's gold leaf that's been peeled off of something.
And I just ask Ed, where do you trade this in?
He goes to the general store for it.
And Gus will take the gold and give him coin.
Right.
What does Gus do with it? Like, it's not exactly like he can go and just pay your suppliers in flakes of gold.
That's what I was trying to get with Ed. Is
That's
it
the same
something you want to chase down now, or would that raise too many questions, Mr. Moretti?
There's no such thing as too many questions.
Let's go ask Gus as long as we're going over there and quizzing him. Yeah.
Yeah, I reckon. Ask Gus whether he's seen this weirdo stranger.
He has not.
Now, that is odd, though, because if he's a prospector out really, really doing what they're saying, he's got to be staying somewhere, or if he's sleeping rough out in the middle of nowhere, he's got to be getting supplies somewhere. And if Gus doesn't know about it,
Where's he getting them?
where's he getting them?
Yeah, real quick, as long as we're at Gus's and he's going to tell us all about what he does with the gold flakes, ask him if there's any other outfitters within, like 20 miles.
No, there's no one else within 20 miles.
What do you do with these gold flakes? It seems a difficult currency to realize its value.
He's got a box of it that he is going to be taking into Phoenix to get appraised and sell.
It's mighty enterprising of you.
Been years since Tortilla Flat had an assay office, so he's got to go to Phoenix for it.
Well, Paul, I guess we've found out as much as we can about that for now.
Yep.
So shall we head out back to original plan of going out in the mountains?
Yeah, we should.
Try and follow them instructions that Rousseau's last letter had.
We should also, I'm thinking, keep an eye out for any smoke.
So, with Charlie's instructions and probably a more accurate map of the superstitions that you can get at Gus's general store, you find your starting point 5 miles from Weaver's Needle, which is about 20 miles from Tortilla Flat. And you're renting horses from Gus?
Gus? Yep, we already had, I think, get out to Charlie's. We rode out on horseback. Same horses.
As you enter the foothills of the mountains, both of you give me an alertness roll, please.
I succeeded on an alertness, but Chad did not.
And I had 70.
Pretty alert.
Ethan, you are very aware of the trio of vultures circling lazily overhead as you ride into the mountains.
I point out, look at all the birds. It's a healthy sign, right, Paul?
It's a sign that the ecosystem is working, Mr. Moretti.
Well, what do you think they survive off of out here?
Would I know what they are? Odds are I would. I mean, vultures are pretty common.
Yeah,
So-
you know what vultures are.
Yeah, carrion.
Oh, all right. Thankfully, we didn't bring any carrion.
So, Mr. Moretti, about how much do you weigh? I'm just curious.
Why? You think the horse is complaining?
No, I'm just trying to calculate the carrion.
Oh, we didn't bring any carrion.
Something like that, Mr. Moretti, yeah.
So that's just a spooky little foreboding thing. So we'll keep
How
pushing
far
on.
off are they?
They're a couple 100 feet up in the air.
Can I kind of triangulate? They are flying over 50 feet that way, 75 feet to my right.
Right above us.
They've got little, laser guided pinpoints on us.
It does seem like they're following you.
It feels like a metaphor for this entire town's industry. All right, well, we'll play into their hand, I guess. We'll keep going into the mountains.
So you find the marked trail that
How
Henry
is-
Rousseau included in his letter.
Yeah, how is it marked? I'm just curious.
There's an arrow drawn with charcoal at about head height, 6 feet off the ground, pointing into the canyon. The marked trail is wide enough that you could have taken automobiles down it. It's a sandy, pebbly floor with high walls of basalt on either side of it. You follow this a ways. Ground level starts to rise as you get deeper into the mountains. So it is an uphill trip.
So we're heading up to a promontory ridge. Yep.
Jason, are you riding lead? Are the two of you riding alongside each other?
Probably side by side, if it's wide enough to.
All right. Both of you go ahead and give me a luck roll, please.
I am lucky. Dad is not lucky.
I is not lucky.
A shot rings out, and Paul's horse bucks and shrieks in pain. Paul, go ahead and give me a dexterity roll, please.
Okay, not a ride roll.
No, because the horse is going down.
He did not make his... You could probably burn 2 willpower points to succeed if you wanted.
Let's see how many willpower I have. Okay. I'll burn 2.
You manage to leap free as the horse hits the ground, kicking and writhing, but not for very long because it does bleed out fairly quickly.
Where was it hit?
In the neck.
I will draw my pistol and look around to try and see if I can figure out where this came from.
Yeah, I'm also arming myself.
Both of you go ahead and give me an alertness roll, please.
I succeeded.
I succeeded.
That succeeded.
All right. You both spot the glint of sunlight off of metal in a copse of scrub oak, probably 50 yards away down the trail. Because you were shot at as you were coming up on the promontory ridge, and this is down the other side.
All right. I'll spur my horse on, go towards it.
I will hug one of the walls and move toward it, having my weapon at the ready.
Okay.
You see which one's better to have out. Wow. Okay, I guess I'll have my shotgun out.
I've only got a revolver, so...
I've got a shotgun and a 38.
I was just shouting abuse at this person, basically. Show yourself, you foul cur.
As you ride up, you see a man break cover and go darting down the trail.
Take a shot.
And, okay, what are the penalties for shooting something outside base range?
Probably minus
20%?
Probably. Depends if it's extreme, it's probably minus 40, but...
Minus 20%.
We see what happens.
He is moving very fast.
I failed anyway. Even on normal roll, I failed.
And how far away is he, would you say, from me?
He's probably a good 40, 50 yards away by the time you get up there, or get down there.
And weapon range is in yards, right? Not feet?
Yes.
So that puts him just at the base range, outer limits of the base range of my shotgun. So I'm going to take a shot at him. The base range is 50. So. Oh, and that's a success.
Just double check, because I know the damage drops on a shotgun.
Yeah, so it's probably only 1d10 at range.
No problem. Just let me know what you want.
It's up at the table. I can't remember what it is.
If it's 1d10, then there's what I got. But yeah.
Full damage up to 10 yards, reduced to 1d10 for 10 to 20 yards, reduced to 1d6 for over 20 yards.
1d6.
1d6.
Okay, let me get you that.
4 points of damage.
Yep, 4 points of damage.
4 points of damage. All right. So you get a glimpse of a figure in a long, tattered coat with a broad-brimmed hat. You're pretty sure you got him, but he disappears around a bend in the trail.
Now, long coat, would I be fair in assuming a duster?
Yeah. He does seem to match the description of the clothes worn by the sunburned cowboy.
So, Mr. Moretti?
Well, I don't think your horse is going to be making it.
No.
So where's this guy going? Just up into the foliage, or is he off on a path, or is there a blood trail?
There is no blood trail. You lose track of him around the bend of a trail, but it seems like he's heading in the same direction you are.
And how fast is he moving, roughly?
Extremely fast for someone running downhill over broken ground.
After presumably having been shot.
Right. He seemed incredibly sure-footed.
Any tracks, or is it all just scree?
It's all just scree.
Well, that's not a great development. We have to share a horse now.
Mm-hmm. I'll walk.
I don't think we've got the luxury of time. We've got to try and get some speed to get to where we're going. I don't know where this crazy weirdo is headed, but it could be the same place we're headed. And if that's the case, then we're going to catch up with him and make him pay for that horse. I don't want to lose a deposit.
No. I guess we keep moving on. I guess gather necessary supplies off of the fallen horse as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Pack it all onto the one.